Let this be a symbol of the fury borne by our countrymen towards Aurelia.
Such was the impassioned speech of Lesath's commander Diego Gaspar Navarro, as images of the Aurelian squadron's destruction over Cape Aubrey played in the background. A day later, his gravelly voice continued to echo through my hungover brain. October, 1 year after the cessation of the Democratic Republic of Lesath's civil war. After the Civil War, Lesath began to set their sights on their peaceful neighbor, the Federal Republic of Aurelia, claiming retribution for years of exploitation. The invasion suddenly began. With the ever-present threat of the cloaked airborne fortress Gleipnir looming overhead, there was little time to react to the few concerns raised about the validity of the war. Such was the speed at which all of Aurelia fell under Lesath's control. Well, not everything has fallen into their hands, but it's only a matter of time. Looking out over the capital, Gaius Tower is both home to Lesath's Central Command and the very symbol of its power. It was originally intended to be a symbol of Aurelia's peace. How ironic. As I looked up at the sun traveling the same old path across the sky, the rays burned my tired eyes. Damn it. I just wish I could finish covering this completely one-sided war and head back home. I'll never get used to being in the Southern Hemisphere with its backwards seasons. The emblem of the Southern Cross. It was on that very day that the aircraft bearing the mark of the Southern Hemisphere brought about the defeat of Lesath forces. But the story barely made the news, and the army showed no apparent reaction. Almost nightly, Lesath's commanding officer, Diego Gaspar Navarro, plays host to grand banquets within Gaius Tower. This evening, he is once again proudly trumpeting the glory of his airborne fortress. I've heard the speech so many times, it feels like I wrote it. Which, in a way, is a good thing, because it lets me concentrate on enjoying the food instead. As I gazed out the window at the night sky, I felt as if even the phases of the moon were somehow at odds with those of the Northern Hemisphere. The words of a fellow reporter, who fancied himself a connoisseur of fine wine, really got me thinking about the price of the glass of wine in my hand. One glass of it is roughly equivalent to several years of a Lesathian citizen's salary. Haven't the long years of civil war left Lesath an impoverished and war-torn nation? Whatever the case, much is unclear about the flow of money in Lesath. Ever since I arrived here, I've only covered stories the military had approved. However, this particular mystery just might be worth investigating on my own. The idea was nothing more than the product of an idle mind. At least at the time. Unthinkable! The chatter of the nightly parties fell into silence. In place of the sumptuous banquet, weapons to protect the capital were rolled in. Griswold is in turmoil over the shocking news, but who would have thought that underneath the chaos lay an even greater story? Aurelia's exploitation of Lesath was all a ruse. In fact, Aurelia had been Lesath's largest benefactor in aid. The truth remained hidden from the public, while any aid meant for food was spent on arms. Why did this happen? Why was a lavish party held to boast the performance of their newest weapon? The trail of money surrounding Diego Navarro would lead me to the answer. Diego Navarro is not only Lesath's commanding officer, but also controls their arms industry. He has used continued conflict as a means to amass an enormous fortune. This war was conceived as a replacement for the Civil War to further increase arms sales. I can't help but wonder how much of this truth the soldiers risking their lives for Lesath really know. The classified documents contained much more than just information on the airborne fortress. The transfer of financial revenue and commodities were also recorded in great detail. What does all of this have to do with Lesath's commanding officer Diego Navarro? Even after all that's happened, why does he still seem so naturally at ease? I've unwittingly found myself fearing for the safety of the Southern Cross. With each passing day, news of new Aurelian victories came pouring in. The Southern Cross's actions spurred the surviving Aurelian troops to battle. Commanding Officer Diego Navarro has retreated and is currently being pursued by special forces. No one would have guessed that a ragtag band of soldiers smaller than a single unit could have put up such fierce resistance. December 10th, several days after the liberation of Griswold, I made my way towards one of the many cities busy recovering from the ravages of the war. Despite my usual misgivings, I could feel myself getting excited at the prospect of meeting the Southern Cross. But when I reached the base, I saw his emblem already gleaming in the skies above. I had heard that today was their first break in a while, but something must have changed that. I merely watched as the jet's contrail stretched far off into the distant sky. Suddenly, I was overcome by a strong sense of dread. The misappropriated financial and material resources were on a scale much greater than the airborne fortress alone could account for. Would the weapon at Griswold prove to be the missing piece to the puzzle? As I wrote down the words that would reveal the truth to the world, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. It said that the only true winners in any war are those who achieve what they intended. Diego Navarro had left Aurelia's capital in defeat, yet his goal of increasing arms exports had been achieved. It seemed as though he may be the true victor in this war. After returning to his homeland, it appears that he now plans to unveil the ultimate weapon before his countrymen. Satellite images of the Archelon fortress will provide the backdrop for his speech to the world. Such audacity must come from his confidence in this ultimate weapon, Fenrir. There's no such thing as a foolproof plan, I whispered to myself as I watched the sun slowly wheel across the sky overhead. Even the country's hero, still in the heat of battle, hadn't returned home for the celebration of victory. The Southern Cross will ensure Navarro's plan ends in failure. Ain't that right? Archelon and Diego Navarro's beloved weapon Fenrir were ripped by explosions and engulfed in flames. While these images flashed on the screen, the eyes of the press watched as the enraged citizens of Lesath stormed in on commanding officer Diego Navarro. When the rage of the thousands had finally subsided, it is said that there was nothing left but the shattered remains of Fenrir. It's ironic that the stage for the unveiling of his greatest triumph would be his ultimate undoing. When it was all over, I tried to get an interview with the Southern Cross, only to find that he had already returned to Cape Aubrey.
He said he's never really liked hot weather.
Eugene Solano, the young radio operator, answered sheepishly. Peace had returned to Griswold, and it was now covered in the colors of the Christmas season. I went ahead and bought myself a figure of Santa, the kind that I could only find here.
Albert, I thought you couldn't stand the Southern Hemisphere.
A fellow reporter said to me as he saw the Santa figure, a memento of this Southern Hemisphere of backward seasons. I like the design, I said as I embarrassingly showed it to him. It bore the emblem of the Southern Cross. By the time the images of the exploding Archelon fortress and Fenrir faded from the stadium screen, Lesath's commanding officer Diego Navarro had long since disappeared. With the true motives behind the war made public and his subsequent failure to regain power, Diego Navarro fled from Lesath. Although there is no more reason to fight, surviving Lesath soldiers continue to put up pockets of resistance across Aurelia. With their leader and direction lost, it's difficult to imagine them ever being victorious. Surrendering units have started to appear, and even I have the feeling that my story on the end of this war isn't far off. Still, with all the coverage of the war's closure, my work here is still not finished. Since I'll be here a while, chasing after that story on the Southern Cross doesn't sound half bad.